The conversation around mental health has taken center stage in recent years as increasing numbers of people around the world face challenges related to depression, anxiety, stress, and emotional distress. The pressures of modern life, compounded by global instability, economic uncertainty, and the isolating effects of digital culture, have led many to confront their psychological well-being in a more honest and open way. Amid this global shift, communities of faith, including Muslims, have begun to grapple with how religious teachings intersect with mental health realities. While the broader public discourse grows more compassionate and informed, many Muslims continue to face unique struggles in reconciling their mental health needs with their spiritual commitments and cultural expectations. Mental health remains a sensitive and often misunderstood topic in many Muslim circles. Despite the deep compassion at the heart of Islamic teachings, there persists a quiet stigma that discourages many from seeking help or acknowledging their inner turmoil. For some, emotional suffering is seen as a sign of weak faith. For others, the idea of speaking to a therapist, especially one unfamiliar with Islamic values, seems incompatible with trust in God. These sentiments, while often well-intentioned, can reinforce silence and suffering rather than healing and growth. The result is that many Muslims struggle privately, fearing judgment or misunderstanding from their families, communities, or even religious leaders. At the same time, there is a growing recognition among scholars, counselors, and health professionals that Islam not only acknowledges mental and emotional hardship, but also offers profound guidance for navigating it. The Quran, Hadith, and the lived example of the Prophet Muhammad offer rich resources that can support emotional well-being and provide meaningful comfort in times of psychological pain. Yet, these teachings are not always clearly presented in the context of modern psychological frameworks. Many Muslims are taught to pray, be patient, and trust God, but they are not always given the tools to understand how those practices interact with real-life experiences of trauma, grief, or mental illness. This gap between spiritual ideals and practical mental health support has created a complex tension. On one hand, Muslims are taught that God is the most merciful, the all-knowing, and that He understands what lies hidden in the hearts of His creation. On the other hand, cultural taboos, misinformation, and lack of access to appropriate care often prevent people from acknowledging their struggles or seeking treatment. This disconnect can lead to feelings of guilt, isolation, and confusion. A person may wonder why they feel anxious or sad despite being religious. They may question whether their suffering is a punishment or a failure to be grateful. In some cases, they may withdraw from their spiritual practices entirely, believing they are no longer worthy of divine connection. The need for a deeper, more compassionate understanding of mental health within the Islamic worldview is more urgent than ever. It is not enough to tell people to have faith without also helping them develop emotional resilience and psychological tools. Likewise, it is insufficient to rely solely on secular therapeutic models that do not account for the centrality of faith in the lives of many Muslims. A holistic approach is needed, one that honors the sacred, while also embracing the science of the mind. Islam, when properly understood, is not in conflict with mental health care. In fact, it provides a strong foundation for emotional well-being through its emphasis on balance, reflection, mercy, and communal responsibility. The story of mental health in the Muslim world is not one of absence or neglect, but rather one of potential waiting to be awakened. Throughout Islamic history, scholars and physicians explored the connection between the soul and the body, the mind and the heart. Terms like nafs, qalb, and aql were used to describe different aspects of the human experience, suggesting an early and nuanced understanding of psychological states. Figures such as Al-Ghazali, Ibn Sina, and others developed frameworks for inner purification and healing that echo many contemporary therapeutic methods. These traditions show that Islam has long recognized the importance of caring for one's inner world. In our current moment, many Muslims are beginning to reclaim these aspects of their tradition, seeking out faith-based therapists, building community mental health resources, and breaking the silence around emotional pain. Young Muslims especially are at the forefront of these changes, advocating for mental health awareness within mosques, schools, and family structures. Their efforts reflect a deep yearning for wholeness, one that integrates religious identity with emotional authenticity. They are asking difficult questions, challenging outdated norms, and calling for a compassionate Islam that embraces mental well-being as an essential part of spiritual life. This journey toward healing is not without obstacles. In many Muslim communities, mental illness is still shrouded in shame. People fear being labeled as weak or unstable. There is often a reliance on supernatural explanations, such as jinn possession or evil eye, to make sense of mental distress. While Islamic tradition certainly acknowledges the unseen world, reducing all psychological suffering to these causes can obscure the real, human factors at play. In other cases, families may discourage therapy due to mistrust of the healthcare system or cultural norms around privacy and pride. These challenges must be addressed gently but firmly, with sensitivity to cultural contexts and a commitment to truth and care. As we begin to explore what Islam truly says about mental health, it is important to approach the subject with both reverence and openness. Reverence for the sacred teachings that have guided generations of believers, and openness to the evolving science that can enhance our understanding of human behavior and healing. This exploration is not about choosing between religion and therapy, but rather about creating a space where both can work together. It is about recognizing that Islam encourages the pursuit of knowledge, the seeking of help, and the building of communities rooted in love and mercy. The pages ahead will offer a deeper look at the relationship between Islamic teachings and mental health. We will examine how the Quran and Sunnah address emotional challenges, what classical scholars wrote about the soul and its states, and how spiritual practices can support psychological well-being. We will also confront the realities of trauma, grief, depression, and anxiety within Muslim lives, and look at how contemporary counseling models are being adapted to fit Islamic values. Along the way, we will meet voices of faith, resilience, and recovery people who have walked the path of pain and healing and found strength in both prayer and professional help. In telling this story, we affirm that mental health is not a modern invention or a foreign concept, but a vital part of what it means to be human and Muslim. We affirm that seeking help is not a sign of failure, but of courage. We affirm that God's mercy is wide enough to encompass our confusion, our sadness, and our efforts to heal. And most of all, we affirm that within the Islamic tradition lies a wellspring of wisdom that can guide us toward wholeness in body, mind, and soul. This is a story about that wisdom and the journey of discovering how it can transform our understanding of mental health, not just as a medical concern, but as a deeply spiritual one. Islam is a faith that speaks directly to the human condition. Its sacred texts are not just theological statements or legal frameworks, but deeply resonant messages addressed to the human heart, mind, and soul. Within the Quran and the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, there are countless moments that touch upon the emotional and psychological realities of life. From grief and anxiety to fear and hope, the sacred sources of Islam reflect an honest engagement with the complexities of the inner world. Rather than deny the presence of mental and emotional pain, Islam acknowledges it, gives it a name, and offers both spiritual and practical tools to navigate it. This understanding, when brought into focus, can become a source of immense comfort for anyone struggling with mental health challenges. The Quran speaks in a language of the heart. Over and over again, it refers to the qalb, the seat of intention, awareness, and emotional understanding. It draws attention to the state of the heart as a mirror of a person's spiritual and psychological condition. A heart can be pure and tranquil, or it can be diseased, hardened, or blind. It can tremble with fear, swell with gratitude, or sink in sorrow. The heart in the Quran is not just a metaphor. It is central to the human experience and intimately connected to how a person feels, thinks, and relates to God and others. Mental health, in this context, is not some abstract issue, but rather a reflection of what is happening inside the heart. Alongside the heart, the Quran also addresses the nafs, the self or soul. The nafs is a multifaceted concept. It is the part of the human being that desires, struggles, hopes, and acts. It is capable of good and vulnerable to harm. The Quran identifies different states of the nafs, showing that the self is not static. It can incline toward base desires and impulses, it can blame itself in moments of regret, and it can reach a state of peace and contentment. This psychological progression reveals that Islam sees the inner life as a dynamic journey. A person is always in the process of becoming, growing, and purifying. The very act of acknowledging one's inner turmoil and seeking healing is part of this sacred journey toward a tranquil soul. The prophetic tradition further illuminates this understanding. The life of Prophet Muhammad is filled with moments of deep emotion, showing that even the most spiritually elevated person experienced the full spectrum of human feeling. He wept at the grave of his son. He grieved the deaths of his companions and family. He felt the burden of rejection, the weight of responsibility, and the fatigue of hardship. And yet, he remained steadfast, not by denying these feelings, but by turning toward God with sincerity and trust. His example teaches that vulnerability is not a weakness. It is a sign of humanity, and when embraced with humility and connection to the divine, it becomes a source of strength. In one of the most poignant examples, the Quran recounts the grief of Prophet Yaqub when he was separated from his beloved son Yusuf. His sorrow was so intense that his eyes turned white from weeping. Yet this was not presented as a failure of faith. Rather, the Quran affirms his patient endurance and his deep trust in God's wisdom. He openly expressed his pain, saying that he poured out his sorrow and grief to God. This moment is powerful because it shows that turning to God does not require suppressing emotion. On the contrary, it invites a person to bring their pain into the light of divine mercy, to speak it aloud in the privacy of prayer, and to find comfort in knowing that God listens and understands. Similarly, the story of Maryam offers profound insight into emotional distress. When she found herself alone and overwhelmed by the physical and emotional weight of childbirth, she cried out in despair, wishing she had died before that moment. This cry, captured in the Quran, is a raw expression of psychological anguish. And yet, God responded not with rebuke, but with support and provision. A stream was made to flow beside her, and she was gently encouraged to shake the trunk of a palm tree so that ripe dates would fall. This story reminds us that even the most revered among us can feel crushed by life's burdens, and that divine care is not conditional on emotional perfection. Healing often begins in moments of desperation, when one feels seen and sustained by something greater than oneself. The teachings of the Prophet further reinforce the importance of emotional well-being. He encouraged believers to care for one another's feelings, to show mercy, and to avoid harshness. He was known for his gentleness, for speaking kindly, and for making people feel valued. His interactions with others were marked by a deep psychological intelligence. He could sense when someone was sad, and he offered consolation. He made time for people's stories, concerns, and fears. He validated their struggles and reminded them of God's compassion. These moments are not just historical anecdotes. They are templates for how Muslims can cultivate communities of support and kindness, where mental and emotional health are taken seriously. Among his many sayings, the Prophet once said that no fatigue, illness, sorrow, sadness, or mental anguish afflicts a Muslim except that Allah expiates some of their sins through it. This hadith acknowledges a wide range of internal experiences and affirms their spiritual significance. It suggests that suffering is not meaningless. While it is never glorified or desired, it can become a means of drawing closer to God, of refining the soul, and of deepening one's reliance on divine mercy. This perspective does not romanticize pain, but it offers a way to hold it with dignity and purpose. Another teaching that offers comfort is the assurance that God does not burden a soul beyond its capacity. This verse is often cited in moments of hardship, and for good reason. It serves as a reminder that while suffering may feel overwhelming, it is never random or beyond endurance. It encourages a person to believe in their own resilience, to trust that they are stronger than they think, and to know that help is near. This idea can be especially powerful for those battling mental health challenges, who may feel helpless or broken. It reframes their struggle as something they are capable of facing, not because they are alone, but because God's support is always present. At the same time, Islam encourages practical steps toward healing. The Prophet sought medical treatment when he was ill and advised others to do the same. He taught that every disease has a cure, inviting believers to pursue remedies and care. This includes mental and emotional ailments, which are just as real and deserving of treatment as physical ones. Faith does not negate the need for support, whether that comes in the form of therapy, medication, or social connection. Instead, it enhances the healing process by grounding it in hope, meaning, and spiritual resilience. Taken together, the Quran and Sunnah paint a rich picture of the human inner world. They do not deny the existence of mental and emotional struggle. They affirm it, validate it, and provide a framework for navigating it. They teach that it is not shameful to feel sorrow, fear, or despair, and that healing is always possible, no matter how deep the pain. They offer a vision of a compassionate God who knows what weighs on the heart and who responds not with condemnation, but with mercy and guidance. In exploring these teachings, Muslims can begin to reframe their understanding of mental health, not as a failure of faith, but as part of the broader journey of the soul. They can learn to see their struggles as moments of connection with God, as opportunities for growth, and as calls to seek both spiritual and psychological care. This understanding opens the door to a more compassionate, holistic approach to mental well-being, one that honors the wisdom of the past while embracing the insights of the present. In doing so, it brings the sacred into the most personal of experiences, offering light in the midst of darkness and hope in the face of despair. In the Islamic tradition, the human being is viewed as a complex, layered creation composed of body, mind, soul, and heart. This multidimensional view has always acknowledged that the human experience involves not only physical needs but also emotional, psychological, and spiritual states. One of the most profound and foundational concepts in this worldview is the notion of the nafs. The term nafs is often translated as self or soul, but it encompasses a broad spectrum of human inclinations, from the base desires of ego to the serenity of spiritual fulfillment. Classical Islamic thought gives considerable attention to the nature and stages of the nafs, and in doing so, offers a deeply psychological framework that parallels many insights found in contemporary mental health theories. The Quran identifies the nafs in three broad states. The first is al-nafs al-amara, often described as the soul that commands evil. This state is characterized by impulses driven by unchecked desires, ego, and selfish inclinations. It is the part of the self that inclines toward harmful behavior, heedlessness, and moral neglect. However, this state is not a permanent condemnation. It is simply one aspect of the human condition, particularly when left without guidance, self-reflection, or discipline. The second state is al-nafs al-lawama, the self-reproaching soul. Here, the individual becomes aware of their shortcomings and mistakes, and begins to engage in inner dialogue, feeling regret and aspiring toward betterment. This stage is one of inner conflict, where a person may oscillate between right and wrong but possesses the awareness that allows growth. Finally, there is al-nafs al-mutma'inna, the soul at peace. This is the state of inner tranquility that comes from alignment with divine guidance, moral clarity, and spiritual maturity. The soul in this state is no longer enslaved by desire or guilt, but rests in a deep, content relationship with its creator. This tripartite model of the nafs is not only spiritually insightful, but psychologically rich. It mirrors what modern psychology might describe as the movement from impulsivity and unconscious behavior to self-awareness, and ultimately to emotional regulation and well-being. The idea that the self is in constant development, moving through stages and capable of change, is central to both Islamic theology and psychological growth models. In this sense, Islamic teachings encourage a dynamic view of the self, where struggle is not only expected but necessary for transformation. A person is not defined by their lower tendencies, nor are they doomed by their past actions. With sincere effort, self-reflection, and divine assistance, the nafs can be refined, reoriented, and elevated. Many classical scholars built upon these Quranic foundations to develop elaborate models of the psyche. Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, a towering figure in Islamic thought, devoted much of his life to understanding the nature of the soul and the process of spiritual purification. His famous work, Ihya Ulum al-Din, or the revival of the religious sciences, blends theological knowledge with a deep awareness of the human heart. Al-Ghazali describes the internal struggle against the lower self as a form of jihad, an effort not just to resist sin but to align the heart and mind with truth and virtue. He identifies traits such as pride, envy, greed, and anger as diseases of the heart, and prescribes specific spiritual practices and habits to counter them. These internal diseases, while not labeled in the clinical language of modern psychology, are undeniably linked to emotional states and behaviors that affect mental health. Al-Ghazali's methodology is not punitive or overly moralistic. It is structured around mercy, patience, and practical steps. He recognizes that the process of taming the nafs is lifelong and often painful. He encourages self-examination, but also emphasizes hope in God's mercy and the importance of community, prayer, and remembrance in the journey of healing. His emphasis on muhasaba, or self-accounting, encourages individuals to reflect on their thoughts, intentions, and actions each day, much like cognitive behavioral therapies that promote awareness and restructuring of negative thought patterns. His legacy remains relevant for Muslims today who seek to understand the connection between inner states and outward behavior. Another giant in the intellectual tradition is Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna, who approached the human psyche through a philosophical and medical lens. He wrote extensively on the causes of emotional disturbances, including anxiety, sadness, and obsession. In his Canon of Medicine, he even described therapeutic approaches involving music, conversation, diet, and sleep. Ibn Sina's holistic view of health considered the body and soul as intertwined, with mental disturbances seen not merely as moral failings, but as disruptions in the natural balance of a person's internal faculties. His work anticipated many of the principles found in modern biopsychosocial models of mental health, which consider biological, psychological, and social factors as interconnected influences on well-being. These classical scholars did not isolate the spiritual from the psychological. They understood that emotional pain could not be healed through prayer alone, nor could the soul be purified by external rituals if the heart remained troubled and unexamined. They called for a comprehensive understanding of the self, where inner purification and mental wellness are two sides of the same coin. Their writings, though shaped by the intellectual and linguistic norms of their time, continue to speak to Muslims seeking meaning and balance in today's fragmented world. What makes the Islamic psychological model distinct from secular counterparts is its integration of the divine. While modern psychology often aims at functionality, symptom reduction, or self-actualization in a humanistic sense, the Islamic view anchors healing in the return to God. The ultimate goal is not just happiness, but nearness to the Creator, and the tranquility that results from living in harmony with divine truth. This orientation does not negate the value of secular therapeutic tools, but it places them within a broader metaphysical framework. From this perspective, the pursuit of mental health is not only a personal concern but a sacred responsibility. Taking care of one's mental and emotional state is part of honoring the trust God has placed in the human soul. This understanding can be deeply empowering. It means that emotional struggles are not meaningless afflictions to be hidden or endured in silence. They are signs from within, prompting reflection, recalibration, and spiritual growth. The believer is called to engage with these signs not through guilt or denial, but through curiosity, compassion, and action. Just as physical symptoms alert a person to bodily illness, emotional turmoil alerts the self to deeper imbalances that may need attention, care, and prayer. Moreover, the Islamic view of the self allows for integration rather than fragmentation. It does not see the human being as divided into competing parts, but as a unified whole whose different dimensions must be in balance. The heart, mind, soul, and body are not enemies, but allies. When one is neglected, the others suffer. When one is nurtured, the whole person benefits. This integrated view aligns with the increasing recognition in modern psychology of the importance of holistic care, where spiritual, emotional, and physical health are all seen as crucial elements of healing. In this light, the struggle with the nafs becomes a noble endeavor. It is not about denying one's emotions or erasing one's personality, but about refining the self until it reflects the values and virtues taught by the Prophet. It is about confronting pride with humility, envy with contentment, anger with patience, and despair with hope. This process requires effort, awareness, and support, but it is ultimately a path of mercy and transformation. Understanding the nafs and its states is not a purely academic exercise. It is a living guide for anyone seeking to navigate the emotional highs and lows of life. It reminds us that change is possible, that healing is a process, and that every step toward self-awareness and growth is a step toward God. The tradition of Islamic psychology is not only a historical artifact, but a reservoir of wisdom that can illuminate the path of mental and emotional healing for Muslims today. It affirms that the journey of the self is sacred, and that within every struggle lies the potential for peace, purpose, and nearness to the one who created the soul in the first place. Throughout Islamic history, there have been countless individuals who experienced the full spectrum of emotional and psychological pain. Their lives were not immune to grief, loss, fear, or despair. Yet their stories, preserved in the Quran, Hadith, and historical accounts, offer profound insight into how Islam does not dismiss or diminish emotional suffering, but instead meets it with dignity, compassion, and hope. By examining the lived experiences of these figures, one begins to see how the tradition encourages an honest acknowledgement of pain alongside a steady reliance on God. These stories are not merely tales of sorrow, they are blueprints for how to hold grief and trauma within a spiritual framework, and how healing can emerge even in the midst of great emotional darkness. The Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, knew grief intimately. He was born into loss, having never met his father and losing his mother as a young child. He experienced the instability of orphanhood and the vulnerability of being raised without the constant protection of parents. These early experiences shaped his tenderness, humility, and deep empathy for others. Later in life, he would continue to face profound sorrow, losing his beloved wife Khadija, his uncle Abu Talib, and several of his children. Each of these losses brought not only personal anguish but also tested his resolve during times of great external pressure. During the year of sorrow, when he lost both Khadija and Abu Talib, the emotional weight was so heavy that it was given a name in the historical record. Despite his immense spiritual stature, the Prophet grieved. He cried. He withdrew to the cave of Hira for solitude. He leaned into prayer, but he also allowed his humanity to show. His grief was not hidden or portrayed as a weakness. It was a testament to the depth of his love and the reality of human pain. The grief of the Prophet was not an isolated experience in Islamic history. The Quran itself is replete with accounts of other prophets who faced emotional suffering. Among the most striking is the story of Prophet Yaqub, who was separated from his son Yusuf for many years. When he received the false news that Yusuf had been devoured by a wolf, he did not suppress his sorrow. The Quran describes how his eyes turned white from weeping, yet he never gave up hope in the mercy of God. He said that he only complained of his sorrow and grief to Allah. This distinction is powerful. It shows that expressing sorrow is not a sign of faithlessness. In fact, turning to God with full emotional vulnerability is an act of deep faith. It is a way of saying that one trusts God enough to bring him their pain without needing to hide or pretend to be stronger than they are. Another compelling example is found in the story of Maryam, the mother of Isa. During the pains of childbirth, alone and overwhelmed, she cried out that she wished she had died before that moment. Her words reflect a depth of despair that many people facing psychological crisis might recognize. Yet God did not respond with reproach. Instead, he provided her with comfort, telling her not to grieve, providing sustenance, and reminding her of his presence. The Quran presents her pain with honesty, and treats it with care. Her suffering is acknowledged, not erased. This offers a model for how we might approach our own pain or that of others. Rather than minimizing it or rushing to solve it, we are called to witness it, to respond with compassion, and to trust in the unseen forms of support that may arrive. Beyond the lives of the prophets, many companions and early Muslims also endured emotional trials. Khadija, the first wife of the Prophet and the first believer in Islam, lived through years of persecution, social isolation, and economic hardship. She remained a pillar of emotional strength not by avoiding the difficulties, but by meeting them with unwavering loyalty and trust. Her life was not one of ease, yet her memory is honored for the comfort and steadfastness she brought to the Prophet in his darkest hours. Bilal, one of the earliest converts to Islam, endured physical torture and racial abuse for his beliefs. The trauma of his suffering was not denied, but transformed into spiritual beauty when he was later chosen to be the first to call the Adhan. His resilience became a symbol of dignity and strength, rooted in his faith but deeply shaped by his experience of trauma. A common thread in all these accounts is the role of connection. Healing did not happen in isolation. It unfolded through community, companionship, and divine remembrance. The Prophet surrounded himself with trusted companions. He spoke to them. He listened. He sought refuge in the presence of God, but also in the warmth of human relationships. The Quranic stories often include not only the central figure's grief, but also the surrounding reactions of family, followers, and even antagonists. Pain is never portrayed as solitary. It is communal, and its healing requires both internal fortitude and external care. This idea is echoed in prophetic teachings that emphasize visiting the sick, comforting the grieving, and being present for one another in times of hardship. Islam does not leave people to bear emotional burdens alone. It insists that the Ummah act as a net of care and support. Trauma, especially in its modern understanding, includes not only the event that causes harm but also the lack of support that follows. When someone experiences loss, violence, or deep emotional shock, their recovery is shaped not only by the severity of the event, but by the responses of those around them. In this sense, the Islamic emphasis on community care becomes even more vital. To sit with someone in grief, to offer dua for them, to check in regularly, to share their burden without judgment or pressure, these are not small acts. They are essential components of healing. The early Muslim community, forged in hardship and tested by constant threats, modeled this collective resilience. Their strength was not simply in prayer or in faith alone, but in how they leaned on one another, how they lifted each other up, and how they saw every pain as worthy of attention. Grief and trauma do not follow a linear path. They ebb and flow, reappearing when least expected. The Islamic tradition allows space for this. It does not impose arbitrary timelines for mourning. Instead, it offers rituals that mark stages of grief while honoring the depth of loss. The funeral prayer is brief but full of meaning. The process of burial includes reminders of mercy and reunion. The mourning period offers structure, but it does not forbid sorrow beyond it. Remembering the dead is not discouraged. In fact, praying for them, giving charity in their name, and visiting their graves are all encouraged acts. These practices help the living stay connected to those they have lost while continuing to heal. In modern times, many Muslims still carry deep emotional wounds, whether from personal losses, displacement, discrimination, or generational trauma. Some wounds are visible, others hidden. Yet the tradition they inherit is one that makes space for sorrow. It does not pathologize sadness or shame those who feel broken. Instead, it offers a path that includes lamentation, remembrance, and return. It reminds believers that the one who created the heart knows what it holds, and that even silent tears are counted and cherished. The stories of grief and trauma in Islamic history are not relics of the past. They are living testimonies that continue to speak to those who feel overwhelmed by loss or shaken by pain. They show that one can cry and still be strong, that one can feel sorrow and still be faithful, that one can question and still be beloved by God. They offer a language for suffering that is neither dismissive nor indulgent, but balanced, honest, and rooted in love. Healing in Islam is not the erasure of pain, but the transformation of it. It is the ability to carry sorrow without letting it consume hope, to sit with grief without letting it isolate, and to speak about trauma without letting it define the self. The figures of Islamic history were not immune to emotional pain. They were shaped by it, refined by it, and ultimately guided through it. Their lives are not examples of perfection, but of perseverance. Their stories invite every believer to walk the path of healing with patience, prayer, and the unwavering belief that even the most broken heart can find rest in the remembrance of God. The human soul longs for connection, peace, and balance. Within the Islamic tradition, spiritual practices are not meant to be detached rituals performed out of habit or obligation. Rather, they are deeply rooted tools that align the human heart with divine presence and offer a pathway to emotional stability and mental well-being. These practices are not solely concerned with the afterlife, though that is certainly an important dimension. They are also designed to bring harmony into daily life, to soothe the inner turmoil that so often disrupts a person's ability to think clearly, love sincerely, and live fully. When approached with mindfulness and intention, the spiritual dimensions of Islam serve as powerful anchors in the emotional and psychological landscape of the believer. Among the central practices of Islam, the daily prayer stands as a pillar not only of worship but also of inner regulation. The act of praying 5 times a day builds a rhythm that counters the chaos and fragmentation of modern life. The prayer requires stillness, presence, and repetition. Each movement and recitation serves to slow the racing mind and center the soul. Standing, bowing, prostrating, and sitting involve the entire body in a cycle that reflects submission, humility, and trust. These physical acts engage muscle memory and carry profound psychological meaning. Prostration, in particular, symbolizes total surrender. In that moment, with the forehead on the ground, the believer physically and spiritually lets go. The weight of worldly burdens is lifted as one acknowledges that control lies with the Creator alone. This ritual, repeated daily, can become a form of grounding. When life feels unstable or overwhelming, the prayer offers a space of return. It is a pause in the day that invites reflection and renewal. It also fosters a deep connection with time. The prayers mark different parts of the day, helping to structure one's routine. For someone struggling with depression or anxiety, where time can become distorted and days can blur together, the prayer can restore a sense of order. It reminds the individual that there is a purpose to each day, that moments of peace are built into the very fabric of time, and that God is present in every hour. Closely related to prayer is the practice of dhikr, the remembrance of God. This can take many forms, from the repetition of divine names to reflective conversations with the self and the Creator. The very word dhikr implies more than vocal repetition. It is about bringing to mind, recollecting, and being conscious. In a world filled with distractions, fears, and emotional clutter, the act of dhikr serves to declutter the heart. When a person repeats phrases like Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, or Allahu Akbar, the meaning begins to settle not only in the tongue but in the heart. These are not empty affirmations. They are statements that reshape perception. They remind the believer that beauty exists in the world, that gratitude is a form of healing, and that God's greatness can contain all sorrows. The psychological benefits of dhikr have been explored by both spiritual teachers and contemporary researchers. The repetition of meaningful words in a calm setting can induce a meditative state. It slows the heart rate, eases tension in the body, and helps regulate the nervous system. More importantly, it reorients the person away from fear, anger, or despair, and toward hope, patience, and serenity. Dhikr creates an internal atmosphere where healing can begin, not by ignoring pain, but by allowing divine presence to enter into that pain. Recitation of the Quran holds a similarly transformative power. The Quran is not only a book of law or stories, it is a living text that speaks to the soul of the reader or listener. The Arabic term shifa used in the Quran refers to healing, and the sacred verses are described as a healing for what is in the hearts. This healing is not only spiritual but emotional and psychological as well. The sound of the Quran, especially when recited with beauty and care, can reach parts of the self that are beyond conscious thought. The rhythm, the intonation, the pauses, all create an atmosphere of reflection and calm. For many, listening to the Quran becomes a source of comfort during sleepless nights or anxious days. The words remind the listener of divine mercy, of stories of resilience, and of the promise that hardship is always accompanied by ease. Beyond the auditory experience, engaging with the meanings of the Quran allows for deep inner transformation. The text offers examples of people who struggled, who doubted, who fell, and rose again. It provides direct messages to the reader, calling them to patience, to gratitude, to reflection. It addresses the brokenhearted, the weary, and the hopeful. It validates human emotions and provides a divine context for them. In times of personal crisis, turning to the Quran can help reframe one's experience. It offers language for grief and pathways toward meaning. Fasting is another practice with profound psychological implications. While often associated with hunger and discipline, fasting is much more than abstention from food and drink. It is an act of heightened awareness. When the body is denied its usual comforts, the heart becomes more attentive. Emotions that are normally suppressed may surface. Patterns of thought become clearer. Fasting strips away excess and brings the believer face to face with their dependencies, cravings, and vulnerabilities. This confrontation is not meant to shame but to purify. It is a chance to reset, to recalibrate, and to return to a more centered state. The month of Ramadan, in particular, creates a communal and individual atmosphere of spiritual renewal. For many, it becomes a period of reflection, self-discipline, and increased compassion. The shared experience of fasting fosters empathy. When a person refrains from food, they become more aware of the struggles of others. This awareness leads to increased generosity and concern, which in turn nourish the heart. Acts of charity, especially when done quietly and sincerely, have been shown to uplift mood and increase a sense of purpose. Islam encourages giving as a means of purification, not only of wealth but of the soul. The act of giving also redirects attention. When a person gives to another, even in a small way, they step outside of their own pain. This shift can be especially healing for those who feel trapped in cycles of sadness or anxiety. Helping someone else, sharing a kind word, or providing material support becomes a way to reconnect with the world and with God. The Prophet Muhammad emphasized the importance of giving, not as a burden but as a source of light. He said that even a smile is a form of charity. These small gestures, when done with sincerity, can become daily acts of healing. In all these practices, intention matters. Performing rituals out of habit can still bring some benefit, but when done with mindfulness and presence, their power deepens. Islam encourages believers to renew their intentions often, to approach prayer not just as an obligation, but as a meeting with the divine. To see remembrance not as a tally of words, but as a turning of the heart. To fast not just to fulfill a duty, but to cleanse and transform. This inner approach does not require perfection. It simply requires sincerity. For those navigating mental health struggles, these spiritual practices can become lifelines. They do not replace the need for therapy, medication, or other forms of professional care. Instead, they provide a spiritual ecosystem that supports the emotional and psychological journey. They remind the person that healing is not only possible but already present in the sacred rhythms of the faith. The daily acts of worship become places where one can bring their sadness, their confusion, their exhaustion, and find solace in knowing they are not alone. Islam does not promise a life free of hardship. What it offers is a structure, a rhythm, and a set of practices that can hold a person through hardship. It offers a vocabulary for suffering and a path toward peace. The prayer mat, the words of remembrance, the fast, the verses of the Quran, and the open hand of charity are all invitations to heal. They are not distant ideals but accessible practices. They meet the believer where they are, whether in strength or in brokenness, and gently guide them back to a place of connection, balance, and hope. Through these practices, Islam teaches that the journey toward mental and emotional well-being is not separate from the path of faith, but an essential and honored part of it. Mental health challenges have taken on many forms in the modern world. While emotional and psychological suffering has always been part of the human experience, today's pace of life, social structures, and unique stressors have brought about a wider range of symptoms and conditions that affect people across all walks of life. Within Muslim communities, these challenges are no less prevalent. Yet many individuals find themselves struggling to articulate what they are going through, often caught between the language of modern psychology and the spiritual framework they have inherited through their faith. When distress manifests in the form of depression, anxiety, obsessive thoughts, or a persistent sense of meaninglessness, some are left unsure of how to interpret these experiences within their Islamic worldview. Others fear judgment, misunderstanding, or being told that their suffering is a sign of weak faith. This tension can lead to a sense of isolation. A person may attend prayers regularly, engage in worship, and still feel a deep sadness that does not lift. They may know that God is merciful and believe in divine wisdom, but their internal state feels detached from these truths. When this happens, it is not uncommon for the individual to begin questioning themselves. They might wonder if their sadness is the result of some hidden sin or flaw in their spiritual practice. This internal confusion is compounded when community members, often with good intentions, advise them to simply read more Quran, pray more, or have stronger faith. While these recommendations can be beneficial, they are not always sufficient on their own to address the root causes of mental distress. Depression, for example, is more than sadness. It is a condition that can affect sleep, appetite, motivation, and thought patterns. It can cause a person to lose interest in things they once loved, to feel as though life is meaningless, or to experience a persistent heaviness that clouds every part of their day. When left unaddressed, it can interfere with personal relationships, work, and religious engagement. Depression does not discriminate, and it can affect the devout and the secular alike. Islamic tradition does not deny the reality of such suffering. Rather, it offers a space where one can recognize their pain without judgment and begin to seek help. Anxiety is another condition that has become increasingly widespread. It manifests as constant worry, nervousness, or a feeling that something bad is about to happen. For some, it comes with physical symptoms such as rapid heartbeat, shortness of breath, or a tight chest. For others, it shows up as racing thoughts, an inability to relax, or obsessive attention to potential dangers. While concern for the future and fear of the unknown are natural human experiences, chronic anxiety can become debilitating. In an Islamic context, a person might feel especially confused by their anxiety if they believe that trusting in God should make them immune to such fears. But Islam does not teach that faith erases fear. Instead, it encourages believers to seek peace through remembrance, prayer, and action, while also acknowledging that the heart may tremble, that the mind may falter, and that these experiences do not negate one's belief. There are also those who suffer from obsessive thoughts related to religious practice, often referred to as waswasa. This condition can cause a person to doubt their intentions, their ablutions, their pronunciation of prayer, or their sincerity in worship. These doubts can become so persistent that they interfere with normal functioning. A person might take hours to complete a single prayer, or avoid certain acts of worship out of fear they will not perform them correctly. While these struggles are often rooted in a sincere desire to do things properly, they can become a source of extreme distress. Islamic jurisprudence and scholarship have addressed waswasa in detail, encouraging those afflicted to resist the urge to repeat actions and to trust in the validity of their worship once the minimum requirement has been fulfilled. Scholars have advised that one should not follow every whisper of doubt and should instead affirm the mercy and flexibility within the religion. Another challenge faced by many is a sense of despair or hopelessness. This can come in the wake of personal failure, loss, or ongoing difficulty. When prayers seem unanswered and relief feels distant, a person may begin to lose hope in their future or even in the mercy of God. This state, known in the Quran as yaz or kunut, is treated seriously because it reflects a disconnection from one of the central teachings of Islam, which is that God's mercy is greater than any sin or hardship. The Quran repeatedly emphasizes that despair is not from the believers, yet it does so with compassion, reminding the reader of stories where help arrived after long periods of trial. From the patience of Prophet Ayub to the escape of Prophet Yunus from the belly of the whale, the message is clear. No matter how dark the situation seems, relief can arrive at any moment, and no state is permanent. Despite these spiritual reassurances, there is still a widespread misconception that seeking professional help for mental health is a sign of weak faith or a lack of trust in God. This belief prevents many from accessing the support they need. In reality, turning to a therapist or counselor can be an act of trust, a form of taking the means while recognizing that healing ultimately comes from God. The Prophet himself taught that every illness has a cure and encouraged people to seek treatment. This principle applies to psychological ailments just as it does to physical ones. Therapy does not compete with spirituality. When approached thoughtfully, it can complement religious practice by helping individuals process their experiences, identify unhelpful patterns, and build healthier ways of thinking and behaving. It is important to distinguish between spiritual low points and clinical conditions. A person going through a period of spiritual dryness may benefit from increased worship, reading, and reflection. But if they are experiencing symptoms that persist for weeks or months and interfere with their daily life, they may be facing a mental health condition that requires more than spiritual effort alone. This does not mean that their prayers are ineffective or that their faith is insufficient. It means that just as we seek medication for a persistent fever or injury, we should also seek professional care for persistent emotional pain. The two are not in conflict. In fact, when both paths are pursued together, they often enhance one another. Muslim mental health professionals are increasingly stepping into this space, offering culturally and religiously informed care that bridges the gap between faith and psychology. They understand the nuances of Islamic belief, the sensitivities around shame and honor, and the importance of integrating spirituality into healing. Their work affirms that Islam supports mental health care and that the tradition itself contains many principles that align with modern therapeutic practices. Whether it is the practice of self-reflection, the importance of community, or the emphasis on hope and mercy, Islam offers a framework that can support the healing journey. In the end, mental health challenges are not signs of moral failure or spiritual weakness. They are part of the human condition, part of the test of life that every soul faces in different ways. Islam acknowledges these struggles and offers both spiritual tools and encouragement to seek worldly means of support. Whether one is dealing with depression, anxiety, obsessive thoughts, or despair, there is no shame in their suffering. What matters is that they do not suffer alone, that they know healing is possible, and that both prayer and professional help are paths open to them. Islam affirms the value of every soul and calls each person to care for themselves with the same compassion that they are taught to show to others. It is through this integrated approach that a person can begin to find balance, clarity, and peace, even amid the storms of the mind and heart. As the conversation around mental health has expanded in Muslim communities, a significant and promising development has been the rise of Islamic counseling and therapy models. These approaches do not see a contradiction between faith and psychology. Instead, they seek to bring the two together in a way that respects the sacredness of belief while addressing the emotional and psychological realities of human life. For too long, many Muslims have felt forced to choose between speaking with a mental health professional who may not understand their religious or cultural background, or relying solely on spiritual guidance that does not fully address the complexity of their mental and emotional needs. Faith-based therapy offers a middle path, one that allows for integration rather than opposition. Islamic counseling begins with the understanding that human beings are multifaceted. They possess a heart, a soul, a mind, and a body. To heal one aspect while ignoring the others is to attempt a partial solution to a full problem. In this integrated model, The therapist does not see the client merely as a mind with cognitive patterns to fix, or as a patient with symptoms to manage. Rather, the client is seen as a whole person whose struggles are often deeply rooted in meaning, belief, and spiritual experience. An Islamic counselor acknowledges that the source of distress might be emotional trauma, unprocessed grief, relational wounds, or cognitive distortions. At the same time, they remain attuned to the client's relationship with God, their view of destiny, and the inner spiritual voice that seeks comfort, forgiveness, or connection. One of the most compelling aspects of Islamic counseling is that it frames healing as a process of return. This return is not just to a healthy state of mind, but also to a deeper sense of alignment with divine truth. In this process, a person is guided not only to understand their past and their emotions, but also to see how their spiritual life has been impacted and how it can be restored or enhanced. For instance, someone dealing with trauma might be carrying guilt that stems from a misunderstanding of divine justice. They might believe their suffering is punishment, or that their prayers were not answered because of personal failure. An Islamic therapist would explore these beliefs with compassion and offer insights rooted in theology, showing that God's mercy is not contingent on perfection, that trials are not always punitive, and that even prophets suffered and struggled. This kind of counseling does not replace theology with therapy, nor does it replace therapy with theology. Instead, it holds both together in a balanced and practical way. Many Muslim therapists are trained in Western models such as cognitive behavioral therapy, narrative therapy, or psychodynamic approaches, but they adapt these tools within an Islamic moral and spiritual framework. Cognitive behavioral therapy, for example, emphasizes identifying and challenging irrational thoughts. In an Islamic adaptation, this process includes exploring how negative thoughts may contradict the teachings of the Quran. A client who constantly tells themselves they are worthless might be gently reminded of the Quranic affirmation that God has honored the children of Adam, or that his mercy encompasses all things. In this way, therapy becomes not only a space for emotional healing, but also a process of spiritual realignment. Faith-based therapists often provide clients with practices that are familiar within the Islamic tradition. They may recommend specific supplications, mindfulness through structured dhikr, or journaling exercises that encourage reflection on gratitude and forgiveness. These tools are not prescribed in a rigid or dogmatic way. Rather, they are offered as invitations to connect the inner work of therapy with the outward acts of devotion. A client working through anxiety may find comfort in the morning and evening supplications taught by the Prophet, or in the practice of breathing with the remembrance of divine names. A person struggling with anger or resentment might be encouraged to explore the Quranic stories of patience and to write letters of forgiveness, even if they are never sent. These exercises draw from the deep well of Islamic spirituality while addressing the emotional needs of the client in a therapeutic setting. The relationship between therapist and client is central to any counseling approach, and in Islamic therapy, this relationship is built on mutual respect, compassion, and confidentiality. For many Muslims, particularly those from conservative backgrounds, the idea of sharing personal details with a stranger can be daunting. They may fear being misunderstood, judged, or having their privacy compromised. Faith-based therapists are sensitive to these concerns and often begin by building trust slowly, emphasizing the ethical responsibility they hold and the sacred nature of the counseling space. For women in particular, the opportunity to speak with a therapist who understands their cultural and religious values can be life-changing. It allows for a level of openness and vulnerability that might not be possible elsewhere. Islamic counseling also plays a vital role in addressing issues that are often neglected or stigmatized within the community. Topics such as domestic abuse, addiction, sexual trauma, and intergenerational conflict are frequently silenced in religious spaces. Yet these issues profoundly affect mental health and spiritual well-being. Faith-based therapists are often among the few people who are both trained and trusted to help individuals navigate these complex realities. Their ability to listen without judgment, to validate pain without compromising moral boundaries, and to guide clients toward both healing and accountability makes their work especially important. They serve not only as clinicians but also as bridges between the individual and the larger community. One of the most beautiful outcomes of Islamic counseling is that it often reignites a person's sense of hope. Many clients enter therapy feeling broken, confused, or distant from God. They may believe that their suffering has disqualified them from spiritual closeness. Through the therapeutic process, they begin to see that God's love is not withdrawn in times of struggle. They learn that healing is not a linear path, but a journey that includes setbacks, growth, and continuous return. They begin to replace the harsh inner critic with a voice of mercy. They discover that even in their lowest moments, they are not alone. This spiritual reconnection does not happen through force or guilt. It unfolds gently, through the experience of being seen, understood, and supported. There is still much work to be done in expanding access to faith-based therapy within Muslim communities. Many regions lack Muslim therapists, especially those trained in integrating Islamic values with modern psychology. Stigma remains a barrier, as does affordability and language accessibility. However, awareness is growing. More students are entering the mental health field with the intention of serving their communities. More imams are collaborating with therapists, recognizing that their roles can complement rather than replace each other. Mosques are beginning to host workshops, support groups, and seminars on mental health. Online platforms are offering therapy and coaching with Islamic sensitivity. These developments are not just encouraging, they are transformative. At the heart of Islamic counseling is the belief that every person has a soul worth nurturing, a heart capable of healing, and a spirit worthy of divine connection. The therapist does not claim to be the healer, but acts as a companion on the journey, pointing the client back to their own inner wisdom and to the mercy of God. Through this process, the client is not only restored to themselves, but also reminded of their place in a larger story of resilience, compassion, and faith. Therapy becomes more than a treatment. It becomes an act of worship, a means of purification, and a way to walk the path of life with greater peace, clarity, and trust in the one who created the soul to be whole. Within the Islamic tradition, the concept of community holds a central and sacred place. Islam does not envision the believer as someone walking the spiritual path in isolation. Instead, it emphasizes the interconnectedness of individuals, families, and the wider society. The Prophet Muhammad consistently reminded his followers that they were part of a collective body. When one part of that body suffers, the rest responds with care and concern. This vision extends to every aspect of life, including mental and emotional well-being. The masjid, the family, and the broader community are all entrusted with the responsibility of supporting one another, especially in times of hardship. In many parts of the Muslim world, and increasingly in diasporic communities, mental health remains a topic that is shrouded in silence. This silence is often reinforced by fear of judgment, cultural norms around privacy, and misunderstandings about what mental illness really is. Within this environment, the role of the masjid can become pivotal. The mosque is not only a place of prayer but also a hub of spiritual and social life. It is where people gather, share meals, celebrate joyous occasions, and support one another through grief. When the masjid embraces its potential as a space of healing, it can become a powerful force in dismantling the stigma surrounding mental health. To do so, the leadership within mosques must first recognize that emotional and psychological suffering is a reality for many in their congregations. This means moving beyond offering only spiritual advice in response to complex mental health issues. While reminding someone of God's mercy, the power of prayer, or the reward of patience can be meaningful, these reminders must be accompanied by an understanding that some struggles require professional intervention. Imams and religious leaders can play an essential role in this process by educating themselves on basic mental health awareness and forming partnerships with trained therapists. When an imam can refer a congregant to a qualified counselor with the same ease that they might refer them to a doctor for a physical ailment, a significant barrier is removed. Moreover, the language used in khutbahs and lectures can set the tone for how mental health is perceived in the community. When leaders openly discuss topics such as depression, anxiety, trauma, and emotional burnout, they send a clear message that these issues are not taboo. They make it known that seeking help is not a sign of weak faith, but a responsible and courageous step. This shift in tone and content can create a ripple effect, encouraging conversations among families and friends that were once considered off-limits. Families, too, carry immense influence when it comes to shaping attitudes toward mental health. In many cultures, especially those influenced by collectivist values, the family is seen as the primary source of support. Decisions are often made in consultation with elders, and personal matters are rarely discussed outside the household. While this closeness can be a source of strength, it can also become a source of pressure. When someone in the family is struggling with depression or anxiety, they may be told to keep it quiet to protect the family's reputation. They may be encouraged to simply be stronger, to have more faith, or to avoid talking about their feelings altogether. These responses, though often rooted in love and concern, can unintentionally deepen the person's sense of isolation. A more supportive family environment involves creating space for open dialogue without fear of dismissal. Parents and elders can begin by listening without judgment, validating the experiences of their children, and being willing to learn about mental health from both Islamic and psychological perspectives. When a young person comes forward to share that they are feeling overwhelmed, sad, or disconnected, the response they receive can shape their entire outlook on help seeking. A compassionate response that includes both empathy and a willingness to explore solutions together can lay the foundation for healing. Families that encourage prayer alongside therapy, remembrance alongside reflection, and faith alongside professional care help create a balanced model of support. The community at large also bears responsibility for the well-being of its members. This includes educators, youth leaders, volunteers, neighbors, and friends. The social fabric of a community can either serve as a protective shield or as a source of added stress. When communities prioritize kindness, hospitality, and inclusivity, they build environments where individuals feel seen and valued. This sense of belonging is critical for mental health. People are less likely to suffer in silence when they know they have somewhere to turn, someone to confide in, and a space where they are not judged. There are practical steps that communities can take to foster mental wellness. Organizing workshops and educational sessions on mental health can break the silence and offer vital information. These sessions can be tailored for different age groups, cultural backgrounds, and genders, ensuring that the message is accessible and relevant. Community centers and mosques can also create peer support groups, where individuals dealing with similar struggles can come together, share their experiences, and support one another in a confidential and respectful setting. These groups can be especially helpful for those who are not yet ready to seek formal therapy, but need to know they are not alone. Youth programming is another area where mental health awareness is crucial. Young Muslims today face a unique blend of pressures. They must navigate questions of identity, belonging, and faith in a world that often feels hostile or indifferent to their values. Many deal with academic pressure, social comparison through digital media, and the internal conflict of trying to reconcile religious teachings with contemporary norms. Providing young people with mentors, safe spaces, and opportunities to explore their emotions can have a lasting impact. When the community invests in its youth not only through religious education but also through emotional development, it strengthens its future. Elders also benefit from mental health support, though they are often overlooked in these conversations. Many older adults face loneliness, grief, and the challenges of aging in environments that may not always value their contributions. Encouraging intergenerational dialogue, creating programs for seniors, and ensuring that they have access to spiritual and emotional care affirms their dignity and fosters a more compassionate community. When elders feel supported, they are more likely to pass on that support to others, creating a cycle of care that benefits everyone. Mental health challenges can be isolating, but the Islamic vision of community offers an antidote. It is a vision in which each person is seen as a trust from God, deserving of kindness, respect, and support. It is a vision where pain is not hidden but shared, where healing is not a private burden but a collective responsibility. When masjids open their doors not only for prayer but also for conversation, when families replace silence with empathy, and when communities cultivate environments of mercy, they embody the teachings of the Prophet, who was sent as a mercy to all the worlds. In bringing mental health into the heart of the community, Muslims are not adopting foreign values or abandoning tradition. They are returning to the very essence of their faith, a faith that commands believers to care for the orphan, to visit the sick, to feed the hungry, and to respond to every cry for help. A faith that understands that the heart can break and that healing is a process, often best supported in the embrace of others. In embracing this responsibility, communities not only uplift individuals but also bring themselves closer to the model of a compassionate and just society envisioned by Islam. Through collective care, the dignity and well-being of every soul is preserved, and the bonds that unite the Ummah are strengthened with purpose and grace. The pursuit of emotional and psychological well-being is not limited to extraordinary moments or singular breakthroughs. Much of healing happens in the quiet, repetitive rhythms of daily life. Islam, as a comprehensive way of living, places significant emphasis on the ordinary habits that shape a person's character and spiritual state over time. Embedded within the Sunnah, the way of life of the Prophet Muhammad, are countless practices that promote balance, clarity, and inner peace. These habits are not random acts of devotion but intentional ways of caring for the body, mind, and soul. They offer a blueprint for how to live with presence and purpose, even when life feels fragmented or overwhelming. One of the most foundational aspects of this prophetic lifestyle is the structure it brings to time. The Prophet's day was not left to chance. From the moment he awoke to the time he went to sleep, his actions followed a thoughtful pattern. He rose early, often before dawn, and greeted the day with remembrance and reflection. This early rising was not just a matter of discipline but a means of aligning with the natural world. Beginning the day with spiritual grounding gave direction and meaning to everything that followed. In the same way, when a person builds their day around intentional moments of stillness and devotion, they create pockets of calm that serve as anchors during stress or uncertainty. The Prophet also paid close attention to his physical well-being. He walked often, engaged in light physical activity, and encouraged cleanliness not only as a religious requirement but as a form of self-respect and mental clarity. Regular movement and hygiene are now recognized as essential to mental health, yet they have long been emphasized in Islamic teachings. A person who takes care of their physical health is more likely to experience mental resilience. The act of making wudu, for example, offers more than physical cleanliness. It provides a moment to pause, cool the body, and reset the mind. Washing the face and limbs multiple times a day becomes an act of mindfulness, a ritual that invites calm and intention into even the most routine moments. Sleep is another area where the Prophet modeled balance. He did not advocate for excessive austerity or neglect of physical needs. Instead, he taught that the body has a right over the person, and that rest is a part of worship when done with the right intention. He slept early, rose early, and took short naps during the day. These patterns, when followed, help regulate the body's rhythms, improve cognitive function, and contribute to emotional stability. In a world where people often sacrifice sleep in pursuit of productivity, returning to this prophetic balance can restore a sense of harmony and protect against burnout. Eating habits also reflect the broader Islamic principle of moderation. The Prophet encouraged eating in moderation, expressing gratitude for food and sharing meals with others. He discouraged overeating and emphasized mindfulness during meals. These practices are not merely about etiquette. They speak to a deeper connection between what one consumes and how one feels. A balanced diet, eaten slowly and with awareness, supports both physical and mental health. Gratitude expressed before and after meals fosters a sense of contentment, which can counter feelings of emptiness or anxiety that sometimes lead to emotional eating or neglect of nourishment. Beyond physical routines, the Prophet emphasized solitude and reflection as essential parts of the inner life. He would often retreat to quiet places, seeking moments alone to remember God, contemplate the world, and examine his heart. This solitude was not isolation. It was a deliberate withdrawal for renewal. In modern life, constant stimulation can drown out the inner voice. The phone, the screen, the noise of obligations and information leave little room for introspection. Following the Sunnah means reclaiming silence, even in small ways. Taking a walk without distractions, sitting alone in nature, or spending a few minutes after prayer in quiet reflection can create a space where thoughts are sorted, emotions are acknowledged, and clarity begins to form. Another profound habit within the Sunnah is the practice of muhasabah, or self-accounting. The Prophet encouraged believers to regularly examine their intentions, actions, and inner states. This is not a practice of harsh judgment, but one of gentle honesty. Taking time at the end of the day to reflect on what was done well, what could be improved, and what intentions were behind each action creates self-awareness. Over time, this self-awareness becomes a foundation for personal growth. When a person is in the habit of checking in with themselves, they are more likely to notice early signs of emotional strain and to take steps toward care and correction. The Prophet also modeled the importance of healthy relationships. He was known for his warmth, his attentiveness to others, and his emotional intelligence. He made those around him feel valued and heard. He encouraged smiling, speaking kindly, forgiving quickly, and checking in on those who were absent. In a world where many people suffer from loneliness or strained connections, these simple yet profound acts can transform relationships. Emotional well-being is deeply influenced by the quality of one's relationships. Kindness, respect, and consistency in how one treats others contribute to a sense of security and belonging. They also invite reciprocal care, creating a circle of emotional support that sustains people through difficult times. The daily remembrance of God, through morning and evening supplications, is another habit that nurtures the heart. These moments of dhikr frame the day with meaning. They remind the believer that they are not alone, that protection, mercy, and guidance are always close. Starting the day with remembrance invites hope and direction. Ending the day with it brings closure and peace. These routines help regulate the emotional tone of life, offering a sense of predictability and sacredness that is especially helpful during times of stress or uncertainty. Journaling is not specifically recorded as a prophetic habit, but it aligns with the Islamic tradition of reflection and intentionality. Writing down thoughts, prayers, or reflections can be a powerful way to process emotions and track patterns. It allows the person to externalize what is internal, making it easier to observe and understand. It also becomes a record of growth. When someone looks back at entries from weeks or months past, they can see how far they have come, how their prayers have evolved, and how challenges have been faced. This practice can be especially healing for those who feel overwhelmed or stuck, as it offers perspective and clarity. The Prophet also demonstrated the value of laughter, playfulness, and lightheartedness. He raced with his wife, joked with children, and participated in celebrations. Emotional health is not only about managing pain, but also about making space for joy. Engaging in activities that bring delight, connecting with loved ones through laughter, or simply taking time to appreciate beauty and wonder are all part of a balanced life. The Prophet's example teaches that joy is not a distraction from worship, but an expression of it, a recognition of the blessings that surround us. By incorporating these habits into daily life, a person gradually creates an environment that supports mental and emotional well-being. These actions are not grand or dramatic. They are small, intentional steps that build a life rooted in presence, gratitude, and connection. The Sunnah does not promise a life without hardship. It offers a way to live with resilience, compassion, and balance. In following this path, the believer is not only seeking to emulate the Prophet in external acts, but also striving to embody his inward tranquility and trust in God. This path of self-care through the Sunnah is not separate from worship. It is worship. Caring for the body, calming the mind, nurturing the heart, and striving for spiritual alignment are all acts of devotion. They affirm that the self is a trust, a gift, and a means through which one draws nearer to the Creator. In this view, Every act of kindness toward the self becomes an offering. Every breath taken with awareness, every step walked in peace, and every moment spent in gratitude becomes part of the journey toward healing and wholeness. The Prophet's life is not only a model of spiritual excellence but also a guide to emotional wisdom and psychological well-being. By walking gently in his footsteps, the believer finds not only religious guidance but a daily refuge for the soul. Healing is not a final destination, nor is it a perfectly straight path. It is a journey that unfolds gradually, shaped by time, experience, faith, and intention. In Islam, healing is deeply tied to the understanding of life itself as a test, a sacred trust, and a process of returning to the one who created the soul. The Islamic tradition acknowledges the reality of suffering, but it never frames suffering as meaningless. Instead, it sees every trial, every ache of the heart, and every anxious thought as part of a larger story in which the human being draws closer to God through struggle, remembrance, and resilience. At the heart of this story is hope. Hope in Islam is not a shallow optimism that things will always go according to personal desire. Rather, it is a profound trust in the wisdom of God, even when the reasons for hardship are not yet visible. It is the certainty that God sees what is hidden, hears what is unspoken, and responds in ways that may be unknown but are always infused with mercy. The Quran speaks repeatedly of God's nearness to those who call upon Him, of His knowledge of what the hearts conceal, and of His power to bring life after death, light after darkness, and ease after difficulty. This hope becomes the lifeline for those on the journey of healing, reminding them that no state is permanent, no wound is beyond mending, and no soul is forgotten. Many people who experience mental and emotional suffering feel a sense of isolation. They may believe that no one truly understands what they are going through, or that their pain separates them from others, even from God. Yet the Islamic worldview gently counters this belief. It teaches that every human being carries burdens, even if those burdens are not visible. It reminds the believer that the prophets themselves, the most beloved of creation, experienced grief, fear, rejection, and loneliness. Their lives are not preserved in Scripture to demonstrate perfection without struggle, but to show that the path to spiritual greatness is paved with human vulnerability. The Prophet Muhammad experienced years of sorrow, uncertainty, and hardship. He was orphaned as a child, lost his beloved wife and children, and faced opposition and ridicule. Yet he never turned away from his mission or from his Creator. His trust in God did not mean that he did not cry, feel pain, or seek comfort. It meant that he carried those emotions with dignity, always returning to prayer, to remembrance, and to community. His life models what it means to hold pain in one hand and hope in the other, to be honest about emotional difficulty while still moving forward in faith. Healing in Islam is also a process of growth. It is not simply about returning to a previous state of ease, but about transforming the self through the experience of suffering. It is about becoming more compassionate, more self-aware, and more connected to God. This transformation does not happen quickly. It may involve setbacks, moments of despair, and long periods of waiting. But within each step, there is an opportunity to learn something about the self, about others, and about the divine. Even when a person feels they are not improving, the effort itself is meaningful. The act of continuing to try, to pray, to show up in life despite the pain, is honored in the sight of God. There are countless Muslims who live with depression, anxiety, trauma, or other psychological conditions, and who still live lives of beauty, purpose, and faith. They may not always feel strong or whole, but they continue to engage with their communities, care for their families, and seek God's mercy. Their stories are not often visible, but they are deeply valuable. They remind others that healing does not mean the absence of symptoms, but the presence of hope, effort, and connection. They show that the journey itself is part of the worship, that struggling to get out of bed and making dua through tears are acts of faith. Islam also teaches that God is closer to the brokenhearted than many realize. In a hadith, the Prophet said that God is with the one whose heart is broken for his sake. The broken heart in this context, is not a sign of weakness or failure. It is a doorway through which a person can experience a more intimate relationship with the divine. When all worldly supports fall away, when even words seem to falter, what remains is the quiet awareness that God knows, God sees, and God cares. That awareness, even if fleeting, becomes a source of strength. One of the most comforting aspects of the Islamic understanding of healing is the centrality of mercy. Mercy is not just an attribute of God. It is the environment in which the entire universe exists. Every chapter of the Quran, except one, begins with the invocation of God's mercy. The Prophet described himself as a mercy to the worlds. Believers are encouraged to embody mercy in their interactions, to forgive others, and to forgive themselves. For those struggling with mental health, this mercy offers an alternative to the harsh inner critic. It allows space for mistakes, for slow progress, and for the reality that healing is not always linear. Self-compassion, a concept increasingly discussed in psychological literature, finds deep resonance in Islam. The believer is taught to hold themselves accountable, but also to treat themselves with kindness. When the Prophet was told of a man who had harmed himself out of despair, he did not respond with anger, but with a reminder of God's vast mercy. When a woman confessed her sins with sorrow, he offered her a path to redemption, not condemnation. These responses show that in the prophetic model, people are seen not only for their actions but for their intentions, struggles, and desire to return to God. The journey of healing is also one of reconnection with the body through sleep, movement, and nourishment, reconnection with the self through reflection, journaling, and therapy, reconnection with others through community, friendship, and service, and above all, reconnection with God through prayer, remembrance, and trust. Each of these forms of reconnection contributes to the overall sense of well-being. They do not eliminate pain, but they make it bearable. They do not guarantee a life without sorrow, but they provide tools to live meaningfully within that sorrow. Ultimately, the Islamic path to healing affirms that being human is a sacred endeavor. It is filled with contradictions, complexity, and vulnerability. Yet within all of that, there is divine purpose. The struggles a person faces are not wasted. The tears they shed are not ignored. Every effort, every prayer, every step taken toward healing is seen and rewarded. This vision does not romanticize suffering, nor does it deny the real need for support, therapy, and sometimes medication. It simply adds another dimension to the process, reminding the believer that their journey is not just about feeling better, but about becoming closer to the one who created them. This understanding brings with it a gentle kind of strength. It allows a person to be honest about their pain without losing sight of their dignity. It encourages seeking help without shame. It supports both prayer and professional care. It holds space for moments of despair while never abandoning the promise of hope. It teaches that every person, no matter how broken they feel, is capable of healing, growing, and living a life that is meaningful, beautiful, and full of divine connection. As the journey continues, there will be days of progress and days of struggle. There will be moments of light and moments of shadow. But through it all, Islam offers a steady hand, a compassionate voice, and a promise that God is near, nearer than the jugular vein, nearer than the next breath. In that nearness lies the heart of healing, not as an endpoint, but as a lifelong journey of return, discovery, and grace.